Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Welcome to episode 141 of Sports Management Podcast. Did you know that 65% of you who listen to this podcast do not yet subscribe? So hit that subscribe button on your podcast app, and together we will grow Sports Management Podcast. Thank you. Today's guest is Kyle Sheldon, the founder and CEO of Name and Number, a soccer-specific marketing and creative agency built to connect teams and brands to American soccer fans and culture. He's also the co-founder of Pathway, where they help ambitious professionals break into and build a career in soccer. Kyle is an award-winning marketer with nearly 20 years of experience in pro sports, and he has worked almost exclusively in soccer except for 2 years in NASCAR. In this episode, we spoke about what learnings he brought from NASCAR to soccer, the story behind the Name and Number logo, the rise of soccer in the US, the importance of FIFA World Cup 2026, what are some Hirable qualities, and much more. Kyle Sheldon, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, thank you for having me. Great to speak to you.
Great to speak with you too. So you are the founder and CEO of Name and Number. So can you talk a little bit about your company?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, thank you. Name and Number is a soccer-specific marketing and creative agency based here in the US. We are a little over a year old, working with brands, clubs, sponsors, basically companies that want to connect to the American soccer fan and American soccer culture.
That's amazing. So you have a long career in soccer and working around MLS. So what made you decide after 15 years in prominent roles in and around MLS, why you want to start your own agency?
Yeah, I think, Marcus, I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. The idea of kind of running my own shop and trying to build something was always interesting to me. I'm a lifelong soccer player. I've always loved the sport. I've been involved, as you mentioned, kind of throughout my entire career, save for a 3-year stint at NASCAR where I oversaw social media. That was the only time I've been outside of soccer. And I've just seen up close the trajectory of the sport in the U.S. in particular and the growth. And, it's not an exaggeration to say every metric across the sport of soccer in this country is going up and has been now for the better part of the last 10 plus years. And, no surprise with the World Cup on the horizon in North America in 2026, but a number of other competitions, Copa America, FIFA Club World Cup. You've got the Olympics in 2028. Hopefully the Women's World Cup in 2027. There's just so much soccer coming. And I think that breeds a ton of opportunity for folks who have been in the sport and understand the nuance that exists in the US, which is really different than anywhere else in the world. Football fans globally, I think, are just a very different breed to those you find in the US. So sort of all of those things combined led me to think there's some room at the table for other folks who understand the sport really intimately and kind of understand how to navigate it in the US versus maybe other parts of the world.
So soccer in the US is really interesting. As you mentioned, so many things now coming up. But for the rest of the world and Europe and South America, what we call football or soccer, has been so popular for a long time. But US is obviously a power player in sports in general. So how have you seen now soccer coming into US and with Messi entering MLS? How do you see the interest for soccer in the US right now?
Well, it's grown significantly. It's funny, even just in my lifetime, I'm 43 years old and have been a fan of the sport my entire life. But when I was in high school, access to the sport just 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, was limited and you couldn't really see that many games. And now I think it's probably one of the few places in the world where you can watch almost any league on any given day across one of the broadcast partners who have it. And so, as I said earlier, the trajectory domestically has been significant. MLS has grown by leaps and bounds. They've added more than 15 teams in the 15 plus years that I've been connected to the league. NWSL is growing by leaps and bounds. USL, United Soccer League, which owns a lot of the kind of second and third division leagues here in the US, also massive expansion. But just the overall interest in the sport, in watching it, whether that's Premier League or Bundesliga, certainly Central and South America, League MX for a lot of the last several years has been the most popular league in the US, right? So the Mexican league is more popular than maybe the domestic league from a TV rating standpoint, or the Premier League, which is a monster over here. So, yeah, as I say, I think every metric, Marcus, is on an upward trajectory, and the interest and buzz around the sport continues to grow. Clearly, signing the world's greatest footballer of all time. I know some will argue that point, but having Messi come into the U.S. and play in MLS, you saw the impact last year with stadiums selling out across the country, and that was on a very limited basis. You'll have a full season. Hopefully, he stays healthy. You'll have a full season of him in MLS this year, and I think it only helps to grow the sport further in the coming couple of years heading into 2026.
I believe so too. And in Messi's case, he is still on the top of the world. Like, he was the best player the year prior he came. Previously, it's been that the players who go from Europe to US, they are been on a down path in their careers. Maybe they want to do one more years before they retire. It's so cool that Messi still in his prime, doing so well, coming to US. That means, that the league is on a different level than it was a couple of years ago. Like, I saw the Beckham documentary, when he came over the first time, the league was not even, close to what it is right now. So it's so cool to see.
Yeah, and just on that comment, Marcus, I think what's been interesting within MLS and maybe to an extent NWSL as well, although they've had sort of some of the best players in the world in their league for the duration of their life sort of cycle, is you see MLS teams signing players in a bunch of different variations now. Not just signing the aging European that is popular, it's signing Europeans who are younger, right? You're signing players in their 20s. You're finding MLS teams signing a lot of players from Central and South America at 18, 19, 20 years old, developing them over a couple of years and then selling them to Europe. So they're really a bigger player in the global football market in a way that they weren't 10 plus years ago, to your point. So I think that's a really good thing for MLS. And yeah, clearly having Messi at any stage in his career is going to be valuable, but having him still operate at a really high level is going to be really fun.
And as you mentioned, also NWSL also obviously has a lot of great players as well, and a lot of investment in those teams from some celebrity investments. So a lot of eyeballs and money also on that league right now.
Yeah, it's been really fun to watch the trajectory of NWSL, and there have been a few kind of big moments. Angel City come into the league a few years ago, as you mentioned, with massive celebrity investment. Bay FC will play their first game this year and just signed a player with one of the biggest transfer fees, if not the biggest transfer fee in women's football history. I'd have to fact check that one, but I know it was a big one. And so again, you're seeing television ratings for NWSL and women's soccer in general increase across the board, and that's been really awesome to see. You also, maybe a note for listeners, is you have United Soccer League, who I mentioned earlier. They'll launch Super League this year for the first time. They just got Division I sanctioning from the U.S. Soccer Federation, so you'll actually have two Division I leagues here in the States, which I think is good. It's more opportunities for women to play at a high level. Certainly there'll be some competitiveness, I'm sure, between those two leagues. But at the end of the day, if you've got more women playing at a higher level, I think it's good for the sport and good for those who love the sport here in the States.
Definitely. So you mentioned 2026 FIFA World Cup is coming to US as well. And obviously that will be an accelerator for soccer as well. So how do you think that from your end, how will that benefit, your company, and how can you help other teams when even more interest is coming to soccer in the US?
Yeah, I mean, it's 2026 will sort of be the exclamation point, if you will, on the sentence of the next 2 years. And as we're out we've had meetings with club teams in Scotland, Italy, England, Germany over the course of the last several months. We're talking to brands who either are already spending in the sport or want to spend in the sport because they see what's coming. A lot of what we talk about is just the lead up to the World Cup and making sure that you build authenticity and connectedness and community in the sport. So you're not sort of someone who's waking up, January of 2026 and saying, I'm just now realizing that the biggest sporting event in human history is coming to North America, and I haven't really thought about it yet. So we're encouraging folks who want to grow whatever their brand, their business, whatever their objectives are. The soccer fan in the States, but I think globally too, it's younger. It has a higher household income. It's tech savvy, and they have dollars to spend. So it's a really attractive audience, but not to wait until 2026 to kind of get started. As you know, Marcus, it'll be an expanded tournament, 48 teams from 32, 100 plus games. Folks don't really necessarily have this one front of mind, but to date, still the World Cup tournament with the greatest number of fans to come through is actually the '94 World Cup in the US, which is a while back. There have been a few World Cups since then, and this tournament will smash that record. You could have as many as 7 million fans come through the gates for the 26th World Cup, up from 3.5 million in 94. So it's just this massive behemoth, but it's not only about the World Cup. It's just going to serve as an accelerator for the sport in totality. And I think you're going to see even more Americans and folks who've come to our shores, fall in love with the sport that haven't already.
It's funny you mentioned in 1994. I was only 1 year old, but that summer is legendary for Swedes. The men's national team came third, and it's still to date the best performance we have done in the World Cup on the men's side. So that's a summer that some people that are slightly older than me will never forget.
Well, I have to imagine with the expanded tournament, you guys will be here in 26. So you'll have to make the trip over this time. You'll probably enjoy it a bit more than when you were 1, I would guess.
For sure. So you have worked in soccer most of your adult life, I would say, in different roles and in different clubs, and now you have your own company. But let's start from the beginning. As a kid, how did you get into soccer, and how did your journey move on from there?
You're asking, Marcus, one of my favorite questions to ask Americans who like soccer. I call it kind of the soccer origin question, because the answer is often very different, right? It's the variety of question I typically ask, kind of, do you have a favorite club team, and how did you fall in love with them? In my case, I'm the oldest of 4, 3 siblings, and my parents didn't really have a connection to the sport, but they put us all in it as we were young. So I started playing at 3, 4 years old, just in the local league, and my younger siblings all did the same. And for whatever reason, as we got older, it just became the sport we most fell in love with. And so we all played. It's probably a little different in Europe than here, but we all played, sort of club soccer, which was kind of travel soccer. We grew up primarily in West Virginia. So when you live in West Virginia, you've got to travel to go find games. So we were all over kind of the East Coast and Midwest, played in soccer tournaments. And for us, my whole family kind of fell in love with it. It just became a connection point for us. We all 4 of us played in college at varying levels. I was by far the least strong player out of the 4 kids, but we all really fell in love with the sport, and so much so that we all went over to the World Cup in 2006 in Germany as a family, and went to a few different U.S. games. And so for us, even today, it's kind of a connection point for us. We love the sport itself, right? And actually watching what's on the field. I have a brother who is on the sporting side. He's been an assistant coach for 2 MLS teams in DC and Austin. My other brother is a filmmaker, but we've created content in and around the sport. And then my sister's a vet, but she likes watching with us when we get together. So yeah, it's just, you started playing it and following it. And then as the sport became more accessible, you're able to watch it more often. And for me, I sort of knew early on that it was what I wanted to make my career in. So I was really focused when I was going in through college and then grad school on shaping experience and a career towards ultimately helping to build the sport. I didn't know, obviously, I'd spent 20 plus years in it and start my own company at that time, but I always had the intent of wanting to work in the sport and help it grow in the States, because I think it's the best in the world.
So your first job, if I'm correct, was with DC United, and you got that job through Teamwork Online, right?
That's correct.
Talk a little bit about that, because I think it's good for, the young listeners that they don't really know like how to get into the industry. So you just give your story of how you got it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it's a good moment to mention I have a second company that maybe you're going to ask about, so I may be preempting your question, but I launched this past November with 2 co-founders, a company called Pathway. And our mission is to help essentially ambitious professionals break into and build careers in soccer. But to your point, 20 plus years ago, I was sort of that kid who was looking for a job, knew he wanted to work in soccer, didn't necessarily have a network or connections. I honestly think I was one of the really fortunate ones, because I just kind of lobbed in an application on Teamwork Online, which still exists today, and posts a ton of jobs. They're pretty much the place if you want to work in sports to see the biggest breadth of different jobs across sports, not just soccer. And kind of got lucky because my resume got picked out and I went through the interview process and got an offer within a few weeks. But I did it really without any network or community. And I think as I've now spent 20 plus years in the sport and hired a ton of people, I've hired over 100 people over the course of my career, built entire departments, is part of the reason we launched Pathway, which is soccer specific, was to help folks find a way to connect and build community and build network kind of as they're coming through college, but even into their careers, right? As even if you're early or mid-career, a lot of where people can find opportunities is through relationships and through the network. So it's been fun to kind of stretch a different part of my brain with that company. And we're really excited about, we're only a few months in, but really excited about the response we've had so far.
I'm sure. And I heard that you are looking for helping ambitious professionals. You really emphasize that word ambitious.
Yeah, it's really intentional. I think that I'm just a really big believer in people who get after it. I think that it's one of the most undervalued kind of characteristics that ultimately find someone be successful. So we do choose that word really intentionally. If you aren't ambitious, if you aren't hungry, if you aren't willing to put in the time and the energy, I think it's going to be very difficult to succeed in pro sports in totality, but inclusive of soccer. And so, even though we're a few months in, we just came through a project, Marcus, with Austin FC, one of the leading clubs in MLS, who've done a really great job kind of growing the fan base, building a brand and doing things the right way. They're really first movers in a lot of ways. We just helped them hire a role, a kind of a marketing project manager role. And as you go through the process and have applicants come in and have people send emails and write a cover letter, it's so evident how those who are hungry and ambitious separate themselves from the pack. And sometimes I think people don't understand maybe where to push and where not to push and how to approach. When do you send an email? Who do you send an email to? What do you say in your email? Is it a formal cover letter? Is it more casual? How do you bring a little life to it? So there's all these little decision points that happen in the kind of the job application process. But I do think that at the end of the day, regardless of your experience or where you got your degree from, or if you have a degree, that being ambitious and resilient and kind of pushing the right way, I would call it, kind of professional persistence, can really lend itself to finding opportunities and breaking through. So yeah, it's a great call out because we do choose that word really intentionally.
So what other things do you look for in applicants, except for, because that's the mindset in your work ethic? Is there something else in terms of, education, work experience? What other things are you looking for?
I think it's the case that it really does vary by job and by discipline. We've set up Pathway to serve and support both the business and sporting side of the industry. So I mentioned my brother is one of my co-founders who was an assistant coach at DC United and Austin FC. And then our other co-founder was an analyst for the U.S. men's national team, including at the most recent World Cup. So they understand the sporting side of the business intimately. And I've spent my entire career in the business side, primarily in kind of the marketing, content, social space, among others. And so it varies by discipline, Marcus. It's hard to answer. I think ambition as a characteristic is usually a strength, but not everybody has like an external drive or necessarily portrays themselves as, just sort of like they're not outwardly ambitious necessarily. With the caveat that it varies by discipline, I really look for people that have been intentional in the type of experience they've gotten prior to getting a full-time role. And this is always kind of the chicken or egg question, right? So you can't have experience if you haven't gotten a job. You can't get a job if you don't have experience. But I do think people that have shown willingness to volunteer for their sports athletic department in university, or have gone and done an unpaid internship. And I think all internships should be paid, for the record. But if you're at an unpaid internship and you're showing the desire to go and gain experience, or if you're done a number of job shadows of people, right? If you've sort of shown a track record of really trying to gain experience and insight, that's usually a really good indicator. It certainly starts with, depending on the discipline, having a starting point understanding of what it is, right? Someone who wants to go get a social media role is going to be maybe very different than someone who wants to be an analyst on the technical side of the house. So you've got to kind of have a starting point there. But beyond the technical experience, expertise, or kind of education background, showing some real intentionality in the work that you've done and what you've pursued, I think is a good kind of first indicator.
So talking about the ambitious, you are currently running 2 companies, Pathway and Name a Number, as we said. So how do you make the day go round with the 2 companies?
I joke that one soccer specific company wasn't enough. I had to launch a second. And frankly, the reason the second one was even possible was because of John and Nolan, my 2 co-founders, Nolan Sheldon and John Bayo. They are that hungry, ambitious individual, both played soccer in college, but weren't professional level players and just built really impressive careers. John, my co-founder, went from selling insurance out of college over a few years to volunteering, unpaid, camp coach at DC United, eventually becoming an academy coach for the U13 team, and just kind of progressing along, helping build out the sporting and analyst department at DC United, and then eventually jumping to the U.S. men's national team and went to World Cup within 10 years. So just an incredible story of perseverance and ambition and really getting after it. And Nolan, my brother, won't mind me saying that he was a really slow center back, but had a head for the game, and started as a camp coach at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida, and similarly just kind of progressed along. We actually happened to all work at DC United at different points. Nolan through the academy, and he eventually got named a first-team assistant at DC United under Ben Olsen, and then went on Josh Wolf's staff at Austin FC. So really good examples and models for how you can build a career despite maybe not having, the advantages of, say, a degree from Harvard or a professional playing career. So the starting point to your question is just that those two have taken on the bulk of the day-to-day for Pathway and allow me the ability to kind of contribute where I can make the most impact. Name and Number is in many ways kind of the company that takes up the most time. And we've been able to build a client base really quickly. So despite the fact we're only 1 year in, we've had kind of more projects, more clients than I anticipated in year one. So I've been able to scale a bit. I've hired 2 full-time people, have a third that's on kind of a part-time basis. And I think very likely we'll hire another person or 2 this year just because business has been good. So it's proven my hypothesis right. You jump into these things not knowing how they're going to go, but pleased to say that I've been able to bring on some really great teammates and colleagues who kind of carry a lot of the load. And I think it's really important that you unplug and take time away. I just went to a concert with my wife last night and just took off a day and a half and got away for a little bit. And, I've got a great team, so they're able to kind of handle things while I step away. And I've got 2 little kids as well. So they keep me, they kind of keep me distracted when I step away from the computer in a really positive way.
I'm sure. And your client list is impressive as well. Borussia Dortmund, MLS, and Seattle Sounders, United Soccer League, used to mention a couple. So that's big names.
Yeah, we've been really fortunate. I think, when people sort of ask me for career advice, I often start with try to be a good human, try to be kind. And I think I'm really fortunate that over the course of my career, I've been able to develop some really great and deep and meaningful relationships with people. And I think as you get later in your career, you realize how important those relationships are. And you maybe don't understand when you're, 22, 23, 24 years old, that the relationships you're building at that time will very likely come back in some way 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line. And that's certainly been the case for me. So a lot of the early projects we've taken on are just because I said, I've got an agency now and a couple of people working with me, and you get folks that call you up and say, hey, I know what you've done in Seattle. I know what you've done in Chicago. Can you help me here? 90+% of the work that we've done over the last 14 months has been inbound. We've done very little kind of outbound pitching. We've done some focused outbound pitching, but for the most part, it's people calling us and saying, hey, I saw what you did here, or hey, I know your track record. So I think that's a real endorsement for, and not that I've been perfect, not every relationship I've ever had is perfect and harmonious. I've made mistakes along the way, but for the most part, really positive and deep relationships over a now increasingly long career in the sport.
That talks for itself. Getting these referrals and word of mouth clients means that you're doing a good job, right?
I like to think so. And, once we do the work, we try to be, we talk about being really flexible and adaptable. We understand working in sports. Every member of my team on the Name and Number side and Pathway side, for that matter, have worked for soccer clubs. So we understand what working in sports is. We understand the nuance of the sport. We understand it ebbs and flows. So we try to be flexible and adaptable and just be good partners. We consider ourselves problem solvers. We're marketers. We're content creators. We can activate a sponsorship, but at the end of the day, it's about problem solving and trying to help someone do something a little bit better than they would have without you.
You have been very conscious about your career. We talked about that. You have so much knowledge in soccer. You have worked in soccer. You grew up playing soccer. You know the industry. But you took 2 years to work in NASCAR. So was that a conscious decision to get like a broader scope?
Yeah, it was. I had a moment in my career where I sort of had a decision point, and I was fortunate to have a couple different opportunities. I actually had an offer to work in the NHL in New York. I had an offer to stay in MLS with another MLS team. I had an offer to go work in the women's game, and then I had an offer to go work at NASCAR, all within a very short window. And as I evaluated what I wanted to do in my career, I actually thought it was a really important thing that I found myself in a more uncomfortable position and worked in a bigger industry, so that I didn't necessarily say this in the interview, Marcus, but the intent was always to take what I could learn from another sport, another industry, another space, and ultimately bring it back to the sport that I loved. And so I went to NASCAR as someone who was not a motorsports fan, who did say in the interview process, don't hire me if you need a NASCAR expert, because I'm not that person. But they were looking for folks to come in from outside the sport and bring a different perspective and some different ideas and try to reinvent maybe a little bit of what had been a kind of a very popular, but, sort of a mostly regional sport with an aging fan base. And so the idea of kind of bringing people in was part of what they were thinking about. And I happened to have some good experience in social from my previous stop at DC United. And so was able to go and kind of build really the foundation for what became a more expansive team. When I started, there was one person doing social media at NASCAR. I was number 2 and helped build out a team that now is, probably a couple dozen people And so again, yeah, really intentional to go and try to be uncomfortable and try to learn and network and take from it what I could, with the idea that I wanted to bring it back to soccer. And maybe the last note is the other piece that was kind of part of my decision making process was seeing the big brands that work in NASCAR. That's obviously it becomes a bit of a joke, right? It's just the number of logos that are on the fire suits of the drivers and on the cars, but you've got massive Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies that are spending tens of millions of dollars in the sport, and it's so ingrained in the sport that I thought that experience of working with the likes of Coca-Cola and Ford and Toyota and these big companies would be helpful and useful. And I was really happy when I was able to come back to the sport as a head of marketing at Seattle Sounders a few years later.
Yeah, there's so many great takeaways, I think, from that. First of all, getting outside of your comfort zone, doing something different. Second of all, getting a broader perspective. And then what you said also, that you don't necessarily need to be a fan of the sport to do a good job. I think that's, I talked to in an earlier episode with Andrew Brandt, who is a former VP in NFL, Green Bay Packers. And he also said that, like, don't say, oh, I'm the biggest fan of this club, I want to work here because of that, because that's not what you need. You need someone who's good at this specific position. So I think that was, really, really helpful. And I hope the listeners take some notes there.
Yeah, I appreciate Andrew's words. I think one of the things I tell folks when they ask for advice, again, is just in any role, no matter what role no matter what industry you're in, is the role is about adding value. You want someone who's passionate. Passion is generally good, but being a fan doesn't make you qualified to do any one thing. And so whatever role you step into, whether you're junior, mid-level, senior, et cetera, is how you make impact and how you add value, and do that within the framework of what the company or club is trying to achieve is really the most important thing. I love passionate people. I love people who are passionate about the sport. But I will say sometimes, having someone who's a deeply passionate fan of the club that you're working for isn't the best thing, because the old adage of seeing how the sausage is made for fans can sometimes be complicated.
Yeah. What were some learnings that you took from NASCAR that you now can implement in soccer?
Yeah, there were a lot. I think I would say I'll say a couple things. One is how impactful star power can be. I had the chance to work really closely with the likes of Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson, and a lot of them who are kind of on the back stage of their career. And you see at a really high level, especially when there's big sponsors involved, what it kind of means to be a professional. And as much as I've loved MLS and started my career in MLS, I started the league, I was only about 10 years old. You could see in the comparison the relative kind of immaturity of the league and the players and the business operations. So seeing how global stars sort of manage themselves, leverage their audience, how they work with sponsors, how polished they are, that was a real takeaway. I think, again, just the size of the fan base and in my case, sort of overseeing all of their social presence, the difference between, with respect to the early days of MLS, sort of, small, intimate fan bases where every fan sort of by individual name, to now a scale where it's, tens of thousands of voices kind of connected on social and looking for different things. The sort of the nuance that exists in really focused community building and sort of doing it at scale. I learned a lot through that process. One of the things I love about soccer, and NASCAR has this to an extent as well, kind of within their different communities of like fans of drivers, fans of the car manufacturers, fans of sponsors in some cases. But one of the things I love about soccer is it feels more personal. It feels more intimate. I think community building in soccer, probably globally, but certainly in the US, is really important. And so there was a lot of kind of crossover lessons I learned there that were really helpful. And then the last thing I'll say, I think just operating at a much higher level with sort of higher standards kind of across the board. And when you're in a bigger company like that, your responsibilities are just more focused, right? When the previous role I was in at DC United as director of marketing and communications was kind of everything. It was design, it was video, it was traditional PR and communications, sort of media relations, marketing campaigns, et cetera. And at NASCAR, it was social media. It's like you're in charge of growing our channels, connecting with fans in a really focused way. And being able to do that and then eventually kind of go back to a broader, wider role, I think was really helpful for understanding the importance of discipline in a particular space. And when you have a specialist, how much of an accelerator that can be. I think I became a better manager later in my career, having had a really focused role. And one of the things, again, it just takes time, I think, over the course of a career to really understand this. But when you can unlock someone who has a particular skill, talent, discipline, I think often of creative, right? Whether it's a designer or an editor or someone with motion graphics, is they're going to come up with something way better than someone like me can ever conceive of, right? My job becomes, how do you sort of put the right guardrails up, the right framework for them to be successful, and ultimately leverage their talent in the right way. And I think having spent time as a bit of a specialist at NASCAR helped me understand that dynamic better, and hopefully made me a better manager later in my career.
I like to talk about leadership. So you mentioned that you became a better manager later. You have been a director in several of these clubs, and your team has done great results. You mentioned now with social media, you helped grow the NASCAR socials with, I think I read 70 million across platforms, something like that. Won several awards with your different marketing teams. So what would you say is your leadership style that has led to this success?
Yeah, I feel like these questions are always a little hard for me because I want you to ask someone who's worked for me, but I'll take my best shot. I think the starting point for me is, I think I try to have the right perspective that we're really fortunate to work in the sport and sports in general, but in soccer in particular, and that it's not the most important thing in the world. It's a sport, and I love it. Man, I love the sport of soccer, but I love my family, my wife and my kids more than I love soccer. And so I think it starts with hopefully the right perspective of, we're fortunate to be in this sport. It's really fun and we're going to work really hard, but there just are more important things in life. And I think when you bring that lens to management and your team understands that you care not just about their output or their work product, but you care about them as people. I hope that most people that have worked for me would say that. I think that's a really great starting point. And then again, I would say my management style evolved, and I just sort of spoke to it a little bit, but it evolved to a place where I understood better, as you go from kind of doer to then manager, I understood better the ability to unlock people's creativity, their talent, their unique capabilities in a way that kind of made a little bit of, the old 1+1=3. And I would say, I try not to be any sort of, a lot of people say this, but it's not really micromanagement. It's just putting up the right parameters, the right guardrails to say you can kind of play within this. I always use the sandbox analogy. It's like, it's not actually just, you don't necessarily play in the sandbox. Here's a sandbox, but it actually might be fun to go play in the swing set. So maybe stay on the playground, right? But if you kind of are clear in defining what you're trying to achieve, what the objectives are, and then you release creative people to kind of go do what they do best, I find that works pretty well. So then it's about just putting the right team of people together with the right talent. And when you work at a MLS club, as I have, you've got to do a lot of different things. You essentially operate as an in-house agency, overseeing every area that is needed. Very few clubs, although increasingly I'd say more, can hire a ton of out-of-house help. They rely a lot on the folks internally. So putting the right team together, making sure you're identifying where there are strengths, where there are weaknesses, and ultimately kind of giving people the right guidelines is at least a starting point for how I'd answer that one.
No, that's a great answer. And I understand it's difficult sometimes to, answer these things about yourself. You have also served, or you are actually serving on a board of directors for a foundation as well, right? I will probably butcher it, but a Kuykenstrong Foundation, is that how you pronounce it?
You were close. Kuykenstrong.
Kuykenstrong Foundation. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, it's we haven't been as active recently, but the Kuykenstrong Foundation was started after a very dear friend of mine named Sean Kuykendall passed away from cancer about a decade ago. He was a reserve player for DC United when I started my career there. And one of those guys you hear people describe that just was like the center of attention, the life of the party, the one who was always reaching out and connecting with folks, and was a bridge builder, full of life. And sadly, got diagnosed with cancer very young, and it took him very quickly, 8-9 months. And even through cancer, he was someone that really spoke eloquently about that struggle and that challenge, and was someone that expressed his faith and his belief in what was to come after his death in a way that I think was really moving for people, and spoke about his faith. And so the foundation was made in his name, led by a gentleman named Mike Foss, who works at ESPN, who was a close friend of Sean's. And a few of us have run a couple tournaments and events over the years to do some fundraising for the Cancer Center at Georgetown. So as I mentioned, it hasn't been as active recently, but building community and helping others through the sport is something that I think we should all strive to do where we can. And that certainly was something really close and dear to my heart for a friend of mine that, sadly was taken too soon.
Yeah, I understand that. And a great cause, of course, the foundation.
Thank you.
Some quick questions, rapid fire, call it whatever you want.
Sure.
the logo for name and number has the number 11 in it.
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
Yes, our identity was designed by a really awesome creative shop out of Seattle called Column. The 11 is meant to be a little hint of an N as well, as you think about name and number. So it's really just meant to represent the 11 players on a soccer field. We're soccer specific agency. The name of the agency has roots actually in American soccer history. It's little known, but there actually is a really long history of soccer in the US. It just wasn't kind of that popular in the early years. But in the 1920s, there was a team in St. Louis called the Vesper Buick, and they were, by all accounts, the first team in global football to put numbers on the back of their shirts. And so I found some awesome archival footage from, I think the year was 1924, so about 100 years ago, of them playing in what was kind of the Open Cup final, kind of like in Europe, sort of or in England, like the FA Cup final. And they ended up losing, but it was the first game they ever played with numbers on the back of their shirt. So, the name of the agency is also sort of in reference to that history. Granted, you got to tell the story. It's not immediately obvious, but I love that there's a little connection to American soccer history in the name.
Love that. I didn't know that, but 100 years ago. That's cool.
Vesper Buick. You have to look it up. If you look at our Twitter, Instagram, you can find the video footage there. It's pretty awesome. It's this small little field in St. Louis, and these guys were not good. I think I could have probably competed with them, even though I'm not very good either. They were just smashing each other on the field, tackles flying in, and it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. You mentioned storytelling. Marketing is storytelling, right? Or it's an important part.
I think so. I think of marketing I think it's a lot more interesting today than it was when I started. Again, about 20 years ago, there are so many places that you can bring a story to life and so many ways to connect with people. One of my favorite things about marketing, kind of, again, independent of soccer even, is just the coming together of all the different avenues. When you think about social channels, you think about earned media and media from a PR standpoint, you think about paid media, you think about out-of-home advertising, just all the different channels that you can communicate through as a company, as a brand, as a club, and how you do that in an interesting way, I think is really kind of the magic of it. And I'm a big believer in it's a little bit science. You certainly need to look at your numbers and understand who your customer is and where there's opportunity. But there's also the creative part of it, and that's the really fun part. Taking insights, taking data, taking what you know, and then trying to come up with something that is going to connect with people, and ultimately, to the point of storytelling is you've got to tell a story, and you've got to create connection with some number of humans in such a way that it resonates and they feel motivated to take some action. Oftentimes it's selling something, but at the end of the day, wanting to go and watch a soccer match and build a community of people is people connect these stories, the stories of a player, the stories of a club, the stories of fans. So I think you're right to say marketing at the end of the day really is storytelling.
Next question. Favorite soccer team?
This is a funny one for me. I don't really have one. I love the sport, and I'll watch just about anything. The first team I supported in the U.S., it was kind of, I lived in West Virginia, so it's kind of between the Columbus Crew and DC United, so I kind of followed both. But I loved Brian McBride, who played for the U.S. men's national team, played in a couple World Cups, started his career at the Crew, and then eventually went over to Europe. And that's the connection to kind of my other answer, which is I always kind of liked Fulham in England because they've always had a ton of American players, including Brian McBride, but Clint Dempsey, Eddie Johnson, Casey Keller. Currently, they've got Tim Ream and Anthony Robinson. So they've got this history of having American players. And I was just over there a couple weeks ago and got to see a game at Craven Cottage for the first time in 25 years, which is really cool. And then more recently, I've come to like Borussia Dortmund. We worked with them last summer, which is obviously a connection point, but saw a game there in December, and the atmosphere is incredible. The yellow wall is incredible. It seems to me it's kind of the epitome of football support and community in a way that was really impactful. So I've really enjoyed beginning to follow them. And I realized that you started this section, Marcus, by saying these were rapid fire, and I'm not going rapid fire. I'm giving you long answers on these. So I'll try to tighten it up.
No, that's good. I was thinking about it actually with the question with the number 11. Like that question could have been what does it mean?
Yeah,
and you would say it's my favorite number,
yeah,
and then you move on. But now I got this great story about the history 100 years back. I'm loving it.
I'm glad you appreciate the longer answer. Keep going.
I do, for sure. Has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think there are always bumps. I'll give a really specific example, though there are several I could pull. I started at the Chicago Fire end of 2018 when the team was just in the beginning stages of a rebrand. And without going into too much detail, because it's probably a whole nother podcast, it was a rebrand that just had a very specific objective, which was in many ways to kind of go a new direction and try to create a new club in many ways. And so there were some decisions made to leave a lot of that history behind. A club that had had a lot of success as the Chicago Fire, won a number of trophies, had a lot of big players, but was moving to a new stadium at Soldier Field in downtown Chicago from the suburbs, had new ownership. So was trying to figure out kind of how to connect to fans that had maybe considered the club at some point, but become fans. And it was a club very much in need of some energy. Anyway, to keep it a little bit shorter, there was a rebrand done. It did not go well at all. It was very poorly received, not only from Fire fans, but fans across MLS. And it was very evident from the moment the logo leaked to then the eventual rollout that it didn't connect to enough of its past. The name was retained, but the mark was completely different. And that was very difficult because we had a great team of content creators and storytellers and marketers, but the foundational element of the mark, it missed the mark so much that it was really painful. It was really hard. And to see a team of people who worked really hard to try to roll it out in an interesting way and to kind of connect it to the city in an interesting way, and I thought did a really good job with the storytelling piece, but because the mark itself was so poorly received that it just was never going to be successful. We were fortunate that we had an owner at that time who took on full ownership named Joe Mansueto, who kind of saw it happen in real time and allowed for us to go through a totally different process and essentially rebrand the rebrand quickly. Almost within a couple months, we were back at the drawing board working on the project. And so without going much further, we were able to create a mark that connected to the previous iteration of the club, connected to history, retained a lot of, I think, what was maybe lost in the poorly received rebrand. And it was a really great series of lessons for how important it is to listen to your fan base and to those who care about the thing that you're a bit of a steward of. Obviously, every soccer club has an ownership group, but I think there's a reality to the community and the supporters and the fan base that exists around a club. It's just different than other American sports. There's a deeper connection and belief that there is a sense of ownership for a lot of those fans and supporters. And if you don't listen to them, you're going to get it wrong more often than not. And I think you've seen that in MLS in a number of cases is just, rebrands and logo changes that have not been well received and teams that have had to kind of go back and kind of rework it. There's a handful of examples. So for me, that was a really great learning process on the importance of listening and connecting to your community and trying to do things with the right intentions in the right way.
And not only in US, right? Like Juventus, when they changed the logo also, like I think they accepted it after a while, the fans, but
Leeds is a good example too. If you remember the Leeds one, right? That was one that they eventually went back. And yeah, to your point, there have been a few of those, and those things they're hard. It's you want to evolve, you want to push, you want to change. You can't sort of stay stagnant. I'm a big believer in that too. But I think the difference is how do you still retain the connection? How do you still ensure that your constituents, your fans, your supporters, the people who care are influencing whatever route you're going in some form or fashion, that you're doing it together?
Who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
I mean, that's a real put you on the spot question. Man, there are a ton of people that I'm sure I could tap into that would be great. I'll mention someone who's been top of mind recently, a woman by the name of Amanda Vandevort, who's the president of USL Super League. She's had a really interesting career working in the sport of soccer, including spending a chunk of time at MLS, leading social media. Got to know her maybe 15 years ago, and she's been at USL now for probably about 2 years and is leading their push with Super League. And as I mentioned earlier, they got Division I sanctioning coming into their first year. She's so dynamic, so interesting, so funny. She loves the sport. And she really has kind of given her career to trying to grow the women's game and the sport in general over the better part of 20 years. So I now know, Marcus, you're going to make me send her an email and see if she'll jump on, but I think she'd be willing to do it. She's a good one.
Awesome. Amanda sounds like a good guest. Before we sign off, first of all, how can the listeners connect with you if they would like? And, if you can plug your social channels.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There's a bunch of them. If you want to connect with me directly on X, formerly known as Twitter, I'm just at Kyle Sheldon. So it's my first name and my last name. You can find me the same on LinkedIn. Name and number is spelled out, name and number, and both on Twitter and Instagram. Pathway is Pathway HQ. You'll find us at Pathway HQ. And always happy to connect with folks. Social is a great place. Obviously, there's some challenges with social in many cases, but I love connecting with folks there. It's a place where I've developed a lot of friendships and connections, and I can't always find time to reply to everyone, but I try to. So if you drop me a line on LinkedIn or Twitter, I'll try to get back to you and say hello.
Awesome. final words, anything I haven't asked you that you want to plug before we sign off here?
No, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I think, maybe just to come back around to where we started, which is it's just this really amazing transformational time for the sport in North America over the next few years. And, we've been talking to a lot of folks through Pathway that are interested in getting into the sport. I would just say now's the time. If you want to work in the sport of soccer, try to get in now. Look for opportunities to connect, again, whether that's volunteering or unpaid, to get some of that experience and start to really understand what's coming, because 26 is going to be amazing. But as I said earlier, it's just going to be an accelerator. And I think the sport's continue to grow here. And I really do think it's only a matter of time until it's amongst the top couple sports here. It's on par at this point in many ways with NHL and MLB. NFL is its own beast, of course. The thing is just a behemoth. But it's going to continue to creep and grow, and so there's just going to be more and more opportunities. So I would say to anyone who's kind of interested or thinking about trying to make a career pivot or break into the sport, I would say now's the time to do it.
Kyle Sheldon, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
It was a great conversation, Marcus. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.